We are back for another Pay Practitioners panel. And today we have our regular panel, but we are also happy to welcome our guest speaker, Paul Ryman. So today we have a fun topic, and it's we're going to talk about mistakes that we have made in comp and mistakes that we see happening. And really, we want you to take away from this conversation today that everybody is human. We are not brain surgeons. Everyone has made mistakes. Very few people have ever experienced death by comp. And we're going to share those stories with you today so you can hopefully avoid some of the things that we've done. So this is always a fun one because I thought about, should we do the mistake that I got caught for and also the mistakes that no one knows about?
One thing I think, and thanks for having me sub in. I appreciate being called into sub when it's about making mistakes. Just going to point out sort of the irony of that to start. And this is just I want to create some safety by offering this, and that mistakes are not like a unilateral thing. There's different kinds of mistakes, right? And some of them are, call them errors, lapses, right? Like things where you just goofed, which is different than I got the wrong solution, right? And I just want to be clear, like there's two different things here. And it's more fun when it's a slip or a lapse or an error. But just to put that safety out there, like I have a way too many sort of litany of mistakes of wrong solutions, particularly from early in my career, right? Like where we just got it wrong. Like we thought this was the right answer. Turns out it wasn't. So I just want to sort of give a framework for discussion there, because I do think we all make those errors in particular, those mistakes. And, which is different than like I sent out the spreadsheet without a password. Like those are different sort of slips and lapses. So it just might help to sort of frame up the safety spot here a little bit.
Yeah,
I love the way you've teed that up, Paul, because when we all heard this, when you make mistakes, you learn the most. And especially when you have the right mentor, coach, manager, leader to walk you along, how to react, because initially your reaction might be all about that self-guilt and understanding and trying to get yourself out of this error that you've committed, whatever it may be. And listen, we're not brain surgeons. That's a little bit of a different error, right? We're not here saving lives. We're certainly supporting and hopefully making people's lives better by the work that we do through the organizational success and growth. But what a gift when you have a lapse and you have someone there to say, let's think about this and let's learn from this.
Yeah.
And the beauty of mistakes or falling, it's not just about how hard you hit that floor. It's what do you do when you get up?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And how quickly you get up too, because time matters in these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you keep on making the same mistake over and over again, well,
that's right.
There's something wrong with your brain at that point. You might want to question whether you need some help, right?
That's right.
We've all been doing the same mistakes over and over again, but at some point we rose and we learned from it. I think that's the other element of complexity when it comes to these things.
Yeah. I remember I think I made an error on a spreadsheet a long time ago, and it was fairly minuscule in comparison to what errors could happen. But it had a consequence to it. But I do remember I was terrified that I was going to be, raked over the coals. And I remember it was my old boss. It was Jonathan Maltos, and I'll say his name because I just think it was like such a great way for a boss to handle it. He came into my office. He looked at me. And he said, "You know what happened, right?" I said, I do." And I was, tail between my legs. I was, in the corner, kind of like Punch the Monkey. And I was, he said, "So we don't need to talk about it. You know what happened. You've taken steps to fix it, so it won't happen again, right?" And that was the end of the discussion. That to me was actually one of the most powerful post-mistake conversations I'd ever had, because it demonstrated a level of trust that was very empowering to know that people trusted me, that it was going to happen, but I also was going to take the steps to rectify that, to become better, like you said, Kat, going forward.
Yeah, kind of same as Paul was talking about the little slips in my analyst days. A hidden tab got me, and I beat myself up over it for so long. And my boss told me, she goes, give yourself the grace that you give others. And that kind of stuck with me, just thinking, okay, you're right. You know, this isn't the end of the world. I've got to move on and I've got to do better. And so just having that grace for yourself as well.
There should be like a comp person's Excel add-in that is like the check for the hidden tab.
Yes.
Like that's a big one. I can think of way too many examples where you think you've cleaned up the file enough and you didn't, right? The hidden tab is a gremlin that gets us all at some point in our lives. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I envy the analysts that are on spreadsheets all the time like we used to be. And they just start off in the software and it's like, oh, that's not an issue anymore.
Yeah, I think a common one. I mean, we're all being Excel Google Sheets nerds at some point, and maybe we still are. Another common one is like summing up like just a partial number of rows. Just maybe there's some blank, or your formula doesn't capture all the rows down, and maybe you're doing dilution modeling for a company is deciding to double up the amount of RSU grants it makes, and suddenly you figure out, oh gosh, I thought it was 5% dilution. Now it ends up being 15. Oh yeah, that kind of mistake probably you want to avoid. But
that blank cell when you tried to use the keyboard shortcut and it stopped you halfway, right? I've been there too, Jack. I'm with you.
It's exactly that. I think we beat ourselves up and we have such pressure because we are dealing with numbers that have consequences. Mm-hmm. So, I think, Justin had given us all grace and said we could talk about mistakes that our friends made. So although I outed myself on this one anyway. I mean, there was way back when I gave somebody a decrease during the merit increase process. And it was absolutely just a goof. But it made it to that person's paycheck when paychecks were like in your hand. And I mean, it was, at the time it was, oh my gosh. But what it taught me was all of the things we just discussed about, the grace that my company gave me, my boss gave me, the person who knew me personally and said, I wasn't happy with my merit increase, but I didn't think I was getting a decrease. And it literally like walked up to me and I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, but I think too, what it taught me was it humbled me. And because it made it very real what I was dealing with. It's not just numbers. These are human beings. And so it really did help me not make that mistake again. And I do like, I think there's sort of twofold. It is, like you said, Justin, at the top of it, you made the mistake, but what did you learn from it? Mm-hmm. And then what are you doing about it so that it doesn't happen again? And I think it's almost that third part sometimes that, are we doing enough to make sure, that doesn't happen again?
Yeah. I think I'll tell a fun story because it's sort of a compounding of a few mistakes on top of each other. So this is when I was an intern. So let's go back 27 years-ish at this point. So it's a while back. But for some silly reason, I was entrusted with a modeling exercise for a sales comp plan of a global company. I was good at Excel, right? I think that's why I was entrusted with it. And, 20-year-old Paul did not understand that currencies matter. And when you are modeling global plans, you want to be careful about that. So V1 of the model that did make it to the client thought everything was in US dollars. That was obviously not correct. So mistake number one. I learned quickly, all right, I need to build in a translation table, VLOOKUP, problem solved. But I did it backwards. So instead of sort of increasing the number from pounds to dollars, I decreased it. So I just changed the volatility a different way. And I remember my manager at the time was now a CEO of a company, came in and he's like, next time you're going to ask for help when you don't know the answer. And this is sort of pre-Google days, right? So like you couldn't just Google it or ask Claude to give you the answer. Like you had to figure it out. It's like, just ask for help. And it's so simple at the end of the day, but like it was two very embarrassing mistakes. We actually got fired from the project for my mistakes.
Yep.
big problem, big accountability, right? Thankfully, they didn't fire me, and oddly, they hired me anyway. But lapse of judgment on their part. There's their mistake, maybe, right? But I mean, it's silly, and I can look back 27 years now and laugh about it. It didn't feel so laughable 27 years ago, right? It was a big problem. I thought I was losing my job. I thought my reputation would be soiled forever. Because comp consulting is a small space, right? Like it's not that big in the grand scheme. So I was convinced I was doomed forever. Thankfully, I wasn't. But boy, that was a painful one.
It is, yeah, it's horrible when, we don't put enough value in sort of those checks and balances, like the things like, like you said, like, why is an intern doing this? Who's checking your work? Who's, so I had, over 2 decades at, WTW is all, that process excellence piece of everything had to be checked. Everything had to be done. You had to document who checked, that type of thing before you give a client something. But I think too, I go even into this idea of, can we get away from giving people Excel spreadsheets? Like, is that still, so then it goes to kind of like back to sort of the solution. What's a solution? Like you were saying, Ashley, like you do it in software now. Like what's a solution so that you're not having to go through the hoops that you have to go through to get an Excel spreadsheet, client ready, and all of those things. Like even, just spending days not wanting to share that PowerPoint with a client with the details that, oh yeah, that's the same PowerPoint I created this like 4 years ago. It's a template I keep just using, or those types of things, right? All those, there's just way too much of that in a lot of these files that we don't really think about. And so is there a better way to create some of these things?
Yeah, and comp teams, tend to run pretty lean. So we're moving fast. And so it's hard to just stop and look at the overall picture. Sometimes I have an AI mistake that is a good example of when we have to check AI's work. But when I was working in Dubai, I was on this project and it was fast paced, like very fast. I'm talking like 6 deliverables a day. And we had a team with us. And I came in the middle of the project to where the documentation we already got at the beginning of the project. But what we didn't check was if all of it was translated from Arabic to English. And so we realized that there is some documentation that we needed that day for the deliverables. And our translator was on vacation. And so we start using all the AI translations. And when the word final becomes beheaded, you kind of have problems with the client. You have to explain yourself a little bit more. So just be careful when using AI, as we know it's not always accurate.
Yeah, and Ashley, you bring a great point on AI, and I feel like we need a bingo card for these sessions now to say, like, how quickly can someone say AI or, Excel or some of these common terminologies that we all lean on. But with AI, what's really critical and what I've seen over the last few weeks, and Jock, you've been just phenomenal, just being such a evangelist in this space, is the governance. Right. So when we think about mistakes that we've made, it encourages us to get up as quickly as we can, dust ourselves off, and think about audit steps. Who do we include? Stakeholders that can preview Excel files or communications. To your excellent point, Ashley. Right? How it's translating our U.S. centric communications in a global, manner. And as we start to lean on AI and automate and go even faster with the AI tools that are doing a phenomenal job with analytics, we still need to take a step back and still apply the audit steps and really look into governance, how this is being done, how this is going to be received, and really engage and lean on the different stakeholders within HR, finance, even legal, those friends that we have that help us through and understand all the steps of compensation from a pay equity perspective, the year-end comp cycle, etc. So to me, taking that comfort that AI has solved all of our issues is false hope. It's doing great work, but we still need to apply that lens of taking a step back, audit, review, and get other individuals to apply their lens and their perspective before we move forward with anything that, we engage AI or our amazing Excel files that, we've designed with our team.
Yeah.
I love that insight, Kat, because it's in a sense it's like we're achieving efficiencies over here,
Hmm.
but that means we have to build in other new processes over here to make sure that we actually can bank on those efficiencies. And so it is that when I think about using sometimes what I'll do is I'll use AI against AI, so
That's right.
so it's that, right? Like
That's right.
developing something over here using one, type of AI and then saying, all right, criticize it, tell me critically what's going on here, or like, and that's what that's a motion I'm trying to learn is I feel like I do need to kind of do more of that, be super critical or challenge myself or whatever it is I'm creating, but I can actually use AI to do that. Tear this up. Here, I wrote this thing. Tear it up now. Like, tell me what's wrong with it.
Yep.
Tell me and I think that's a great space to now be in. And it's just, it's deploying the AI differently. But to your point, Kat, it's also, there has to be this, verify sources, cite sources, that type of a
Yep.
thing. Check what this is, building that in to anything that you're doing.
Yeah.
I
And
think what
Nancy,
you both,
go ahead, Jack.
so just quickly, what you both are doing, flagging correctly, you're mapping the process before you involve AI, right? And that is precisely what my friend's biggest mistake was. Oh, friend. Um, Early in my consulting career, yes, I did many mistakes with Excel, but there was one particular mistake I did, which was a completely different ball game. Was not an execution mistake. What was a process mistake? We were running. I was just joined Mercer, and tension. Like you're in the spotlight. You're the new guy. You have to prove you're valuable. And I saw that the Mercer team was running. They're running several Excel benchmarking projects across multiple clients, and the process was brutal. Like I literally couldn't sleep at night thinking about all the manual copy and pasting going across spreadsheets, like hours of it. Like I didn't sign up to do copy and pasting. I could keep on telling me this. So what I did, look, I'm gonna build a set of Excel lookups formulas, the index match plus index, I don't know, plus indirect plus, that cut like it's gonna cut down that 4 hour of copy pasting into perhaps 30 minutes. And I was genuinely proud of it. I was like, I was staying up at night building these formulas because I knew it could scale, whereas the copy and pasting would not. But here's what I got wrong. I thought that was the priority. I thought it would, you know, bring me in to do that kind of process improvement. And probably, yes, they did, but the timing was completely off because in investing so much time in improving the process by building these formulas, I actually delayed the actual delivery by maybe a day. Not groundbreaking, but when you have multiple clients chasing, it
Hmm.
can, the partner will get the blame. Like they don't like being asked where's the work, right? So I honestly got blamed for the delay, and it didn't matter a lot whether I was, you know, doing good. I was making things more scalable. I just got the timing wrong, the sequence. So for me, the main lessons learned from that is before you jump onto the solution and think about what's not working and provide for new your solutions as a new guy, the lessons is really to understand what the priority is first, prove the problem first, and then propose a smarter way. um, and I think this links to a common way of saying it: no good deed goes unpunished. Like the intentions were obviously great, was good, but the outcome, half a day late, what's this guy been doing? Clearly, he hasn't been doing enough copy pasting yesterday. I mean, that was that was the wrong part. So that's my lesson.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, Jack, you mentioned that, and it reminds me of the mistake that I made in my earlier career. I mean, I guess it was mid-career, was not understanding what the expectations of senior leadership was. And so one of the challenges that I had to do was create, as basically an accruals table for all of our employees that were eligible for a bonus plan. It's about 3,000 employees, and every time somebody went on leave or had a promotion or a bonus target change or anything like that, it was a new row of data. And historically, what we had done is someone manually just pulled a change report and then keyed in the changes row by row. And the beauty of that system was, though it was very cumbersome and hard to maintain, it was very easy to understand and anybody could do it. So I thought, I'll just make this thing way fancier and make everything happen behind the scenes and nobody will have to touch it. And I think I nearly ended up on a PIP for it because I was so focused on trying to create a solution that I knew that I would, to offload the work that I had to get that done by a machine. That was my relentless, blinders on. It's gonna be a black box that's awesome and no one has to touch it again. But at the end of the day, the real solution we had to solve was like, can people defend it? Do people understand how it works? What happens when I leave? Are they going to rebuild it? And so I always thought that was a really good learning lesson for me, because I thought I was doing this great work and I was being, disciplined for it, which was just a very strange feeling, but a really good learning experience.
Yeah, that's probably a big Uber outcome here for like a theme around comp mistakes is focusing on the solution, not the problem, right? Like you get so locked in on, I think this is the right answer, whether that's automating this process, whether that's, I want to design it this way, right? That you could apply this principle in so many different directions. But when you get locked in on an answer rather than the question, you're running a risk of missing an issue, right? You don't have the right context. Maybe you asked the wrong question before you stumbled on the answer. Maybe it's not the person that matters question, right? Like just, you got to focus on the problem first and the solution second.
Yeah, it's the context. I feel like that's the thing I just keep saying over and over. And I feel like I'm annoying people as I ask for it, but to me, it's just, the context is everything, because if I understand where the question is coming from, where the ask is coming from, that tells me things, just like you're all saying, like, is this, is it a calculation or is it an explanation? Is it, and even just, we just actually just had this with a customer the other day that it was, they were asking for a deliverable and it was, just kind of asking them like, all right, you've been making this ask, but like, what's behind that ask? Like, are you, it was around a project plan. It was like, are you giving an update? And yes, as a matter of fact. Oh, okay, cool. Like, is there a format that you use that like we should be using? Like, it was just kind of like pulling that through, just asking if few really simple questions, but it gave us then an idea rather than sort of spinning up something that wouldn't have been appropriate or wouldn't have, maybe not the right level of detail. Like so much of the work that we do is about providing context. So, yes, it's the formulas, yes, it's the calculation, but so much more of it, and especially now, right, is about explaining, showing your work. How did you get to where you got to? And even more so, how do I get sort of my explanation in your mouth? Like, how do I help you internalize the message and be able to say it in your words, which is like an even, I think, bigger ask, but I find nowadays it's less about the numbers, it's more about the words around the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Nancy, you bring a great point in terms of, checking in with that client and making sure. I have learned over the years that I'm going to call this micro check-ins, right? So before you immerse yourself completely into this process that makes sense to you, makes sense to your team, all the comp geeks, and we're loving the data and it makes sense, do those micro check-ins with your next leader, with that individual that is the one that sees the bigger picture, that is the one that has to deliver this narrative, this story. right? Because we're so busy with the Lego pieces, we forget that those Lego pieces are supposed to end up in creating a product, a house, a vehicle, whatever it may be. That's the story behind what we're trying to put together. So I would encourage to do those micro check-ins with the respective relevant stakeholders to get that feedback before you spin your wheels in this phenomenal work that we all know we have the skill set, and our teams are doing just such great work behind the scenes. But leading on those stakeholders with those micro check-ins are just, it's just such a valuable step to take as you try to avoid mistakes. Secondly, there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal, um, again talking about AI and what's the impact of, college students, what they're studying, and how it's definitely changing what they're enrolling in based on a lot of careers disappearing. What AI is really not able to do is to bring exactly what you pointed out, Nancy, context. It's not contextualizing and telling that story the way that humans are able to do. Our creativity is limitless. AI is using what it's already been done. So it's sort of like making a copy of a copy, right? But smarter and much more comprehensive. How amazing is it for you to take all that learning and create something new?
Mm.
So, as you're creating something or putting data together, the beauty of humans is that we're able to create something brand new. So, should we then spend time utilizing what we're being told how to think, or should we continue to create new things that will then continue to shape AI and how it's putting all this intelligence together? So, just a little bit of, that contextualizing aspect, we can do that. Our leaders can do that. Our CEO can do that in preparation before we get in front of our board of directors and we fall flat in our storytelling because that's not what they were looking for.
Yeah. If I take what you're telling, Kat, and Nancy and Paul said as well, I think what we're getting to is defining what really makes a good business partner and consultant.
That's right.
One thing I really enjoyed about my consulting days was being brought along to a pitch and seeing the more senior colleagues, how they would interact with clients, especially at the initial phase where you're much more inquisitive and trying to sort out the problem. And I noticed that those principals and partners that would try to please the clients by suggesting solutions, almost like jumping a bit the gun, would end up more often than not winning the projects. Whereas those that apparently seemed to be playing difficult, but actually was very clever, those that were acknowledging their questions, the situations, making credible observations, breaking the problem down into trade offs, those that would surface even contradictions in what the client were saying, suddenly the client or the prospects started, thinking, oh, like, this guy has some serious, or woman has some serious credibility. And I think that's precisely what it takes to be a good business partner in house or a good consultant in a consulting company. And yes, how much can you teach AI that? It is evolving, but it is probably, as of today, not something you can fully replicate. AI, even if you teach it through cloud skills and plugins, I'm not sure if you've been playing with this, like it's an amazing tool. You don't have to repeat your instructions. You don't have to give a context at a time because it has assimilated that skill and it is automatically summing it every time you're talking about a specific subject. But even so, it doesn't understand what it's doing. Only humans can. In order to replicate it with that creativity, imagination that Kat was talking about, you really need to deeply understand it.
And I think certainly I think that one of the themes that we're hearing is there are limitations with AI, that we should not rely on it to solve all of our problems. It's going to create a lot of problems that another AI will need to solve. But I think there are a lot of ways that AI can solve a lot of problems that we have.
Sure.
One of the ways that I have really appreciated seeing is take a sales incentive plan, give it to AI and say, how would you game this? How would you, as a salesperson, try to make the most money possible, ethical or not? And it really can help to find. I mean, I would, whether I say it's a mistake, it's more of an oversight, or there are always going to be things that we don't consider. But I think that the AI, using AI in that sense, has been a really nice way to reduce and mitigate some potential mistakes that could be happening down the road. I'm curious. I mean, do you have any other examples where you have used it to truly solve problems versus create others?
Well, right now, the main benefit I'm reaping from AI is we focus on the time savings, and yes, that applies sometimes, but it is not applying to me more often than not. Like, I don't see any immediate benefit in terms of timing. We're like most people think, oh, let's adopt AI so we can go outside and enjoy our life more. Maybe that will happen. I would hope it works for you. But for me, what I noticed is not much the time saving, but the quality of the output that I wouldn't say exponentially, but it is really, really better because if I bring in the right tool for the right workflow, that is the big if there, it's able to surface insights and value that you may have not thought about. And to your point, it's able to do things like in your example, you're trying to reverse engineer and put yourself in the shoes of someone else. It's able to do that at scale. So you could probably create 2 or 3 different personas, very different salespeople, but united by a common objective to game the system to do exactly that and use those insights to improve the design of sales incentives. So yes, it's not much about time savings after all. It is about the value added that it brings,
Yes.
because you're essentially duplicating your brain to some extent.
Yeah, I'll disagree slightly in that I do think there is a lot of time savings opportunities if you have repeated processes, right? So for a novel experience, I agree with you, Jack, 100%. Like you're going to end up reviewing and editing and changing, and probably a similar amount as if you just did it. But just for example, like when we have a new client and we're looking at their census file, it happens in every project. There's a set of things we look at every single time, and I'm not saying you feed that to AI. We've used AI to generate sort of repeatable code that produces the same analysis over and over again, right? So we're not feeding the data to Claude and saying, figure this out. It's no, we know we're going to produce these 6 charts looked at this way, just make it happen, right? And you could templatize that in Excel to an extent too, but we get a much faster turnaround by we've built our own app using AI to build the app. Right. So I think that's where if you've got a process to your framework, start with your process. What is that thing that you do over and over and over again? Then you can sort of find the right way to automate that more completely. And then you're not double checking generative AI at that point. Like the AI sort of built the thing that you're using over and over again. So I do think there's time savings and things like that perspective that are material when it's a repeated ask.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just really quickly, as you were saying that, I realized why I thought there were no time savings. There actually are time savings, but I'm working the same amount of hours. So why is that?
Yes.
That's a completely different problem. Like you aren't able to say, hey, take a break and stop. So if I look at the same amount of time, what I'm being doing with AI, probably the real change there is not like the time saving, but is from a absolute standpoint is the productivity, because you chose to keep on working and do more things, but actually you've been able to do more things on the same amount of time because yes, you were quicker and you also extrapolated more value from it. So absolutely right.
That's what I was going to say. Like I'm enjoying experimenting with different things, using it as like a proof of concept place so I'm spending the time rather than say, producing something in the way I would, like an email newsletter, something like that. It's like you're saying, can I use Claude to create an app that will generate content for me that's much more bespoke, and I can do it in a way that's just much more rapid, and test it and see, do I like that? Do I not? And I think the other thing too, I think, Justin, what you were getting at was what I'm calling sort of opposition research, right? In a way, like with a, like almost like with a political campaign, but like that's the stuff. Getting the sort of taking what something you've produced and then testing it. It's almost like red teaming, but it's like trying to break it or trying to like to test whatever it is whatever content you're generating, bringing that sort of level of criticism to it before, so that way you can hone, fill in the gaps, whatever, so that way when you do give it out to the world, you're less likely, right, to get sort of that opposition, if you will. I think that's really where it's incredibly useful, and I'm trying to honestly, dig into that more now too.
So I was laughing because I saw Jason's comment just came in. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Very good. Hello, Jason. Well, and if I may, not to digress from our friends' mistakes in comp, never us, it's our friends. There's also about, to be debated or discussed, mistakes because of the process or the decisions made outside of compensation that are not the right decisions. And I had an experience about a few years ago, and this is where I started to coin the term death by comp, because there was a decision made pretty much a week before a year-end compensation process was to be wrapped up. Over 100 single spreadsheets in over 60 countries. So you can think of all the securities and all the hidden tabs and all of the passwords and all the work that it entailed, shared across various countries through a shared site. And there was a decision made a week before this was to be wrapped up. So all the leaders made their decisions. Everyone was feeling good about the entire process. It was the first year this company was going through this process, and a decision was made to reduce the budget, essentially. So instead of taking the approach of strategically reducing the budget equally across the board on a global basis, sounds simple enough, the spreadsheets were opened once again with a reduced budget to all the leaders to rethink their decisions. And as you can imagine, before that can be executed, your team is spending upwards of 22 hours per day executing on this new budget, securing the spreadsheets, ensuring nothing has changed. And then what happens when you give somebody an opportunity to rethink their salary decisions and bonus decisions? Well, they start to think about their readings decisions and people who have already left. So now they want to reallocate. So for me, that was such an impactful experience, not personally, but for the rest of the team and the rest of the stakeholders throughout the organization. And most critically, for the business leaders that needed to get back to their business and make money for this organization, because it was now a new fiscal year. So they needed to start working against their new goals. So as you can imagine, I really felt this was one of the most impactful errors that really is housed within comp, but really was not something created by comp, but that comp was trying to really work through and be the best partner that they could possibly be. But death by comp really was our mantra, because it really took superhuman energy and dedication and love to get this process through once again, to be reintroduced to these leaders, and then go out with the appropriate narrative to re-engage everybody to process this information. So I also want to take time to say there's also that level of mistake that as leaders, we should really be brave to discuss with our executive leadership, with our board, whomever it is that is planning or thinking through some of these steps, to really have them understand the implications
Yeah.
of this and truly the impact to their business.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
you raise a good a little concept there about like the mistakes we create sort of by how we work. There's a couple in the comments, I think, Justin, that we wanted to that are
Yeah.
worth highlighting, right? Around, and there's a few, but I think one is sharing too much. Right? I think that's a great one, is if you focus so much on what we care about, leaders don't care. Like, they just don't. And why would you adjust something? What about this data source? Why is it best practice for that? Like, in most cases, I whatever. Right? I know I need to hire that person. And right. So like sharing more, you often open yourself up to sort of the liability of needing to justify it even more, right? It creates this vicious spiral of, you show your work, then I'm going to inspect your work. And, for better or for worse, and, I've been at this a long time. There's a lot of best practices that if you really get challenged, good luck. Because it's just a common practice that got a PR agency, right? It's somebody did a really good job of defending it as a best practice. So when you share too much, you open yourself up for inspection. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be transparent. Like, I don't want people to take away, well, then hide it all and just give them an answer. But it's finding that, explaining your reasoning, acknowledging it as reasoning, and being honest about where there's a judgment call. Like, why this versus that? That's where you just need to be candid, in my opinion, about like, yep, here's how I think about it. Now let's make a good decision as leaders. But getting too methodological is often a mistake.
Paul, I love that, because I think the idea of this is what I think and this is why I took that approach, there is nothing wrong with that. And most of the time, you're probably going to be the most insightful, researched, knowledgeable person about compensation practices in that room. So you should feel comfortable to be able to, I made this decision because this is my expertise and this is what these are the factors that led me to that, but this is what I think the right decision is. And I think, it goes, and I think when you're talking to different types of people, like, there's a reason executive summaries are a thing, right? There's a different kind of conversation and a different level of detailed information that you want to share with people, and understanding what they want to take away from that. One thing I would say and recommend for everybody is, if you can, take a DISC assessment and do that with your team. It is a tool. It's kind of like a Myers-Briggs test, but for work personalities. It really helps you to understand what's your personality type, what's the communication style that works for you, what are the things that maybe you should avoid. I guess triggers is the best word I can find. Like, what triggers someone to be able to, when you bring something to them. We work with Michael Franco at Quokka Hub. He does it. We have a small team, but we still have everybody do these employee engagement surveys and these DISC assessments, because it helps us communicate so effectively and kind of understand how one another work together. So I think that not understanding personalities and expectations is a big mistake in comp.
That's a good one I wanted to raise as well before we get too deep into the time, right? Like, misreading somebody is a huge mistake that I made a lot. And it always showed up in the form of an exception, right? It's the unprincipled exception. It's that engineering leader. And in all three of my stops, it was an engineering leader, like, just figured out a way to get me to say yes. And I misread either their intentions, I misread their sincerity, I misread the context, right? But like, not really getting why this person was asking or what are the real consequences going to be, bit me way more often than not in my operating stops. For sure.
And one of the things I think it's good to have what you're talking about is sort of that self-awareness, and knowing sort of, even though this is what I believe and what I know to be right, how are my respective audiences receiving me and what's going to work? Because I know in my experience, I've come across many people who aren't just going to take my word for it. So, what are the things that I need to bring to the table to help convince them? And so it goes back to kind of maybe I don't need to be the one to say it. Maybe there's somebody I can bring along.
Mm.
So I've acted as that person and also brought that person. Maybe it's that third party, the impartial third party. So maybe that's the consultant, maybe it's a research paper, maybe it's an article, maybe it's, but all well and good. It's I think sometimes we have to kind of push away our egos as well. Kind of,
Yeah.
suspend your ego. What's the more important thing? Getting the thing done. So let's get the thing done in whatever manner is going to work. And oftentimes with leadership, maybe it's having just the right tone, like you're saying, Justin, in the executive summary. Maybe it's making sure that executive summary has certain points that tie to the business, and this is what they want to hear. They want those words. They want maybe it's having the third party consultant come in and say the words, even though you're the one that prepped them. Like, of course you are, but it's but it's okay. Like you don't have to be the one on stage, right? It's like so I think it's really thinking through. There's a variety of different strategies you can employ to just get the thing done, but don't become your own worst enemy. And sometimes it just begins with just like what you're saying, acknowledge what works with those personalities, those different people. That's, I think, a big part of our work, because I think where we fall flat is when it's like, no, I have all these data sources. No, I did all these. Look at my complex thing. Look at all the things that I brought together. It's like, okay, that's a great way to like lose the person. So it's no, how can I get just the right words, concise, explain the thing, just the right information, and maybe it's not even me saying it. Maybe you need to hear it from this person over here.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Incentive design plans are just kind of scary in general. I think about short-term versus long-term incentives and when it's appropriate, because I'll bring Enron into this for Houston, our Houston folks. Everyone thinks of Enron as an accounting mistake, but let's get deeper down into what actually it was. I mean, it was a huge plan design mistake as well. You're incentivizing, your employees with these large bonuses for these short periods of time. And so not looking at that long-term picture can create that bad behavior. So I think that can be obviously a huge mistake that can get overlooked. Leadership, to Kat's point, might have a goal that they think, maybe a cash improvement plan goal for this year, this calendar year. And then you start thinking more about as, the plan design as the sales incentive people, as well as the comp people. And well, we should go in there and actually give them that design behind that versus just saying, okay, let's create, this design just in that short-term period without, showing them more of the data and how that might unfold long-term.
You're so right, Ashley. That's such a great point.
Well, while there's a lull, I have a mistake. No, it's funny you were talking about the currency exchange rates earlier. I want to know. I want to know how many people that has bit in the butt. We were the last company I was working for, and it's not the last company because of this mistake, but the last company I was working for, it was an Australian-based company, and our LTI program was based in Australian dollars. That was not messaged to us. And the currency symbol in Australia is the same as the currency symbol in the US. So towards the end of everything, when we were kind of running through the budgets, we're like, why are we over by a lot? Like a lot. And it turns out because the exchange rate was not something that was considered at the time. And this was after the letters had gone out. I mean, this one we could not walk back. But it goes back and you look at a process that you run with dozens of people for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I can't tell you how many things we checked, but there are just those things that in the future, I will always know to check the currencies. But I think it's one of those funny things. You can check 100 things, but there's probably always 101st and 102nd thing that you didn't think to check, or that you thought was right in the first place.
I was watching Traders, the Australian version, and I got confused by that as well. So I'm glad you clarified.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
that
do find.
courtesy. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to say, I do find, yeah, once you make the mistake, you can't, like, you don't forget it, and
Yeah.
it's, yeah, and then it becomes like in that checklist of these are the things I need to check. Yeah, that's one of them.
mhm.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and I find that as we're doing our work and it reaches a certain level of, teams working on the data, to find that mistake before it reaches the employee themselves, that's okay, right? The biggest mistake is once it impacts that employee. And I once was working on a very critical offer with a leader, and we agreed on the offer. It was a Canadian dollar, and this person went forward and explained this offer as US dollars. So as you can imagine, it was a lot higher. And this leader quickly recognized the error, and I was tasked to have the discussion with the candidate as to what transpired. So, sometimes we have to go in there and just take ownership of these errors that are communicated to employees, which to me, that's the worst scenario. Um,
Yeah.
Once it reaches the board of directors or your CEO or the impacted employee. But if you're catching errors, with your HR leaders or your business leaders, what a great opportunity to fix things and give yourself grace to move forward and then to audit based on what you just learned. But to me, once it reaches that particular individual, it is so much harder to explain. And this is where oftentimes we're asked to come into the room and be the ones to, really take the fall for this. And I think all of us are usually very gracious about, taking that fall because it is a calm topic. But I find it interesting that even when someone else is communicating an error on their part, it sort of falls back to compensation to address and have to have that difficult discussion with someone about what just transpired.
Yeah. And about difficult discussions, one mistakes I see very often being made by compensation teams in-house is waiting for stakeholders, managers, people partners to come to you with a
Mhm.
problem rather than going to them to build rapport from the start without
Mm.
having a key issue to discuss, because that sets the tone and the level of trust for future conversations when the problems will arise, and they eventually will. Every time I speak to someone that works in TA or broader HR, they ask me, why is comp so close-minded, so secret? Why do you guys stick to each other and don't socialize with? And that what probably makes me a very weird comp person, because I'm exactly the opposite. And at some point, I realized, okay, maybe I chose the wrong profession. But then in hindsight, I think now pay transparency is forcing comp teams to be more open in the sense of not just transparent, but engaging, just like looking for that rapport, looking for that engagement um, outside of our team. And ultimately, it's going to help us build the stronger relationship we need to then feel like the other person trusts us and we trust them when a problem arises and we need to fix it. Because you might have the best solution ever and you might be totally right. But if the person at the other side, on the other side of the table, doesn't know you, doesn't trust you,
Hmm.
Yep.
it's very unlikely that you will
It's
be
going nowhere.
perceived. Yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, to make it.
relationships are everything.
Absolutely.
Relationship and knowledge sharing. I think I've said this before in previous sessions. Empowering our stakeholders with the right level of knowledge is so critical. It not only helps them to be knowledgeable and confident as they have these discussions and understand the entire process, it also helps in building those relationships throughout the year. We should not just show up at year end compensation. We should always be engaged all throughout the entire year on different aspects to deliver that value through the year as the business evolves.
Yeah.
So well said, Jack. That's absolutely on point.
Absolutely. Well, that looks like a good point to wrap up with. So, again, thank you, everybody. Special thanks to Paul Ryman of Novo Insights for joining us today. He also does another really cool podcast, the Totally Rewarding Chats. I think Nancy, I think you've been on it, right? Yeah,
Just
you were on it recently. So,
coming soon, I think. We're
is it coming
releasing
soon?
very
Definitely
imminently.
watching that.
Yeah.
Watching, listening.
Jack was a guest just a week ago. I think
Yeah.
it was released as well. So I guess you're all due at some point.
No, well, again, thanks everyone for joining for the Pet Practitioners panel this week, and we will see everybody else again in a couple more weeks on another Friday at the same time.